Town Hall Experts Talk. My name is Laura Saunders, Marketing and PR Manager, and today is the 15th of October. I have David Sawford and David Cook with me, and we are going to be talking about winter maintenance tips. David Sawford is Head of Building and Project Consultancy. He has extensive knowledge of construction methods and building use types, both in design and project management of building works. He advises and acts on all aspects of property, including condition surveys and defect analysis. David Cook is Senior Building Surveyor. David has over 40 years' experience as a building surveyor and has worked on various property types, including commercial and residential. He has experience of the full range of building surveying, including defect diagnosis and condition surveys. Welcome, Davids.
Thank you, Laura.
So first things first, obviously it's still quite mild this time of year, but the weather will get colder. What advice would you give to anyone looking to prepare their property for the colder weather?
Well, firstly, it really depends what sort of property and whether it's occupied. Certainly, if you've got an unoccupied property, it's time to be starting to think about draining it down, or at least putting the heating on at a low setting to keep some ambient warmth in the property. Obviously, if we do have a cold snap, you might need to put the heating up a little bit more. Make sure that you don't have any issues with potential freezing of pipes, particularly in unoccupied properties.
Okay, and when we're talking about freezing of pipes, also looking at external pipes as well, because it's not just within the property. Sometimes things like external taps can cause real problems. So it's the view of the whole property, not just the building.
Yeah, so lagging of external pipes, or you can get proprietary lagged covers for outside taps and the like, which also is a good idea, particularly if we have a cold snap.
And would you suggest that almost when it comes to kind of insulation, particularly externally, that really any property owner should be looking at doing that now before it gets too cold?
Absolutely. I would always have all external pipes lagged all year round.
Right.
To a professional standard, and then during the colder months have a cover, and you can buy them from a lot of the DIY stores. You're not going to be using the outside tap during the winter months. You can put it on there, lag it up nicely, and then you know that it's safe. Some properties will also have isolation valves internally, so you can isolate the outside taps. If you do that, isolate it, and then turn the tap on to allow the water to drain out.
Okay.
But of course, it's very important that you know where these valves and stop taps are as well. So make sure you're familiar with the layout of the building and where you can take steps to prevent problems. Prevent much better than cure. And absolutely now is the time to be doing it before we get to the cold weather.
That's good to know. I think if I was as a property owner myself, I'd be thinking, I should do it when we start to see the cold weather. But actually, you need to be prepared before the cold weather because obviously issues can arise. Absolutely. So we've talked about freezing of pipes, heating. Anything else to add?
I would say, well, firstly, a good stock check of the external fabric of the building, because it's one thing having the pipes lagged and safeguarded, but you want to make sure the external envelope is watertight. So you don't get any water getting in, which may cause problems to the building structure. So primarily the roofing, making sure you get any defects made good, any repairs carried out, even minor ones, because water getting into the roof space can cause all sorts of problems. Guttering as well, very important. You get the guttering checked to make sure it's taking the water away and not discharging down the external walls. Water down the external walls can make the walls very wet, which causes real problems in terms of freezing, causing damage to the brickwork, but also causing dampness internally.
Yeah, I'll just interject there to say if your downpipes are discharging onto the ground, that can also cause long-term problems to your property. So it's just worth checking that they're discharging to proper drains or discharging well away from the property so that you're not saturating the ground surrounding the building and setting up longer-term issues.
Yeah, and it's worth taking a walk around in the rain just to see where the water's going so we can get a quick sense check of what's happening. And it's not just about repair as well. Always worth at this time of year making sure your gutters are cleaned out so it's not full of leaves.
Yeah, the leaves are about to drop. The leaves have just changed colour, so as we speak, there will be the next windfall and there'll be lots of leaves on the ground. So it's probably a fraction early to be cleaning gutters, given that the leaves are about to drop, but certainly within the next month or so, that's good time. Make sure the outlets are all clear and there's no blockages in downpipes. As David said, when the next rainfall occurs, that's a really good time to walk around the outside of the building and check that there aren't any dripping gutter joints, which is common occurrence on plastic gutter sections. They might need resealing, but it's a good time now to be doing it whilst you've not got an emergency, because the roofers will be busy come the next storm.
Okay.
And as well as the obvious things in terms of guttering and roofing, making sure you've got no cracks or obvious leaks or gaps in the external fabric, filling any gaps, doing any sealing around windows and doors, draft proofing. Relatively simple and straightforward to do, but it really is very helpful in terms of reducing heat loss, making sure your property is warm, comfortable, and keeping your energy bills down. It's a way for the water to get in, but also it's a way for the heat to get out. So it's for the sake of a very small investment. Again, as we mentioned about the external pipes and taps, you can get proprietary sealing systems from DIY stores to fill gaps and to put a seal around doors and windows, which is very easy to do and well worth the investment of time.
Okay.
The other thing really to say, it's also worth checking any trickle vents are open so that you're allowing ventilation within the property, because we're coming into the winter months where people don't open the windows as much. Condensation in properties is becoming more of a problem year by year, with buildings being more cosmetically sealed up, and we're all sat in the buildings breathing and creating water vapour that's got to go somewhere. Lots of properties are now starting to suffer more from condensation, where buildings aren't ventilated in the same manner as they used to be with, for example, an open chimney and maybe drafty windows, and people are very much more energy conscious and not heating the buildings quite the same as they used to, and those two factors really do amalgamate to create condensation issues, which can be very bad for health. So one thing I would suggest is that trickle vents are kept open. Make sure you use extractor fans. If you have got condensation issues, then take specialist advice and try to cure that, because it's not good for health.
I was going to say, because like the older properties probably don't have vents and things like that.
No, they won't, but they'll have drafty windows. The other thing to note really is simple things like trying to avoid drying washing in the property, making sure that you put the extractor hob on when you're cooking and got a boiling pan on the stove. Make sure the extractor fans are on when you're showering, so that you're getting rid of as much moisture as possible as quickly as possible.
In terms of the services, I think now's a good time to be thinking about getting your boiler serviced, making sure that's working efficiently and effectively before you get into the winter period proper. If necessary, if you've got a working fire or log burning stove, considering getting the chimney swept, which helps the fire to run more efficiently, but also is very good in terms of a preventative measure potential for causing problems, fires, etc. If you've got radiators in your property, now is a good time to be going around and bleeding the radiators to get the air out to make them run more efficiently. So just doing a bit of a health check on the services installation as well, so it all works more effectively. Now's a good time for getting that out of the way. And when you get the boiler service done, just make sure you get a gas safety certificate in place as well, so that's up to date.
I was just going to say, actually, with the prevalence of solid fuel appliances, the other thing just to note is just to make sure that the batteries are in your carbon monoxide detectors and that they're all working. Obviously, during the winter, everything's going to be sealed up a bit more. You're not going to have the windows open. You're going to be using the boiler and the wood burner or appliances more. So make sure your carbon monoxide detectors are in date, got batteries in, and are working.
So I was going to say one last point. If you've got a sort of off-mains heating system, oil, LPG, make sure you've got enough stock in fuel. You don't want to be caught short, so make sure you've got either enough in or provision for getting it.
Have you seen it where property owners haven't carried out them thoroughly, and then there's been a lot of issues?
Absolutely. Certainly with condensation, it's becoming more of a prevalent issue and a health issue potentially. Empty properties, we see it every year where properties are left empty for a short period of time without any heating on, and you have frozen pipes and potentially flood issues.
Yeah.
Even when properties are occupied, you need to be, if we have a proper cold snap below -1 or so, consider putting the heating on more. We see every time we have cold snaps of that nature, plumbers will be excessively busy because people have bursts due to frozen pipes.
And I guess if you've got a property that's vacant, your first thought is probably just to turn everything off.
Well, turn everything off and maybe secure it, but and turning it off and draining it down is a good preventative measure. If you properly drain down all the water out of the system, it's not going to freeze.
Yeah, that's good advice.
But just to be aware that if you do get an internal leak with a pipe or a tank, it can cause enormous amounts of damage if left unchecked and unspotted for even day or two. So it really is important that you get these measures in place if you're going to be away from the property.
Have we seen many issues previously? You've talked about obviously condensation issues. Is there a kind of a common theme of issues that we've seen with like cracks and things like that? Or is it very much bespoke?
I would say there's no common theme. Every property is different. We've seen quite a number of flood damaged properties caused by various issues. Condensation is very prevalent, but I wouldn't say there's a running theme. I think it's down to each individual property, and it's just making sure that the regular maintenance that you would expect to need to carry out is done in a timely manner to prevent consequential further damage.
Yeah.
The sort of common things we do see on the building fabric side are things like flashings on the roof becoming detached or being detached, allowing water into the roof spaces, which causes problems. Loose tiles and slates in the winter, the wind picks up and that can dislodge tiles and slates, causing problems. As we mentioned earlier on about the guttering, the walls getting soaked, it doesn't take long in the winter for the wall to become very soaked, and then you've got internal problems with dampness coming through into the internal fabric of the building. They're pretty common across many types of property.
I think obviously so far we've talked very much about what the property owner should do. You talked about like loose roof tiles and things like that, which obviously sometimes might not be that easy to spot, especially if your roof is quite complex. So how can we help with these checks?
Well, we can undertake an overview condition report on the building to give a sort of sense check, a health check on the building to identify any obvious issues that may need to be picked up. Not a full detailed building survey, but just an overall condition assessment to give the owner or property manager a view of what's required to be done to cover the winter months.
And what does that involve, us going to the property and then kind of providing a detailed report?
A report on the key elements, the key capital elements, the roofing, the guttering, the walling, the windows, etc. And a sense check of the plumbing installation just to make sure there's no obvious issues or defects that we can pass back to them.
So if everything sounds a bit daunting, if you're listening, then obviously do contact us, because we're able to kind of do all the checks for you and then say, right, this needs to be looked at, and almost future-proof your property so that you don't have to worry about missing anything.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. But it's not necessarily always daunting. Some of the simple things can be done very easily, and it's not a daunting issue. It's a case of, for example, making sure that you're adequately heating the property. It's just adjusting the thermostat, adjusting the times, and making sure that the simple things are actioned. Everybody could stand outside when it's lightly raining and check if the gutters are dripping. It's simple things that will be very effective at helping the building and preventing issues. I'd
agree. And while we're pointing out things that would need checking, potentially could go wrong, this isn't something to be massively concerned about. Generally, this is housekeeping. So it's areas we can assist, we can provide advice and guidance, and generally the repair works or the prevention works that are required are relatively straightforward and simple.
There might be also issues the property owner's been putting off, like they know that they've got damp on this wall, or they know that there's a crack, or there's windows that are causing drafts. So I guess try not to put them off until it gets really cold, because then it will lead to further issues. But if you do need any professional advice, please contact us. So we've talked quite a lot about the issues. We did mention about, we've mentioned a couple of times about the property being vacant. Are there any extra precautions that property owners should take with a vacant property? Because obviously they're not going to be there. I'm talking more like if it's a letting property possibly that's vacant, or they go away on holiday for a long duration of time. Is there anything else that those individuals need to be mindful of?
I think we've actually covered most of that. The one thing just to watch out for is insurance.
Okay.
Quite often insurers put a stipulation within the policy of the number of days that the property can be empty.
Yeah.
And if you exceed that, they will effectively walk away from the insurance. So just be very careful on that. And if it is going to be empty for longer, take advice from your insurer, because you may need a special policy to cover it as it's empty. We've already talked about draining down the property, making sure the property is secured, and that they are the key points. It's also worth having somebody check in on the property at least every week, collecting the post so it doesn't build up in front of the door, making sure the property's secure and that there's no obvious issues that have suddenly developed.
Yeah.
Like the roof or a dripping gutter. Catching those early can make a repair really simple versus complex and expensive.
Okay. That's good advice. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on before we conclude?
Just in terms of the very minor housekeeping stuff, I would say, and it's always worth, I remind my friends and family about, make sure your external lights work.
Yeah.
That's really important in the winter, and people tend to forget about that sometimes. And also keep something by way of grit or salt to hand in case you get a very slippy drive or pavement. Because while you're keeping the house in good condition as well, you've got to look at the whole estate, and you don't want having accident or injury on your property. So it's worth just getting stock in while it's available to make sure you're ready for any eventuality.
Yeah, I guess that's more important if you're in a rural location as well.
Not necessarily, you can still have a frost and a slight freeze in any area. It's more about knowing your property and your driveway and the road. If the road has a contour that puddles water right in front of your gate, you're going to know that you're going to need to keep it defrosted. Whereas if it drains well, then it might be less of an issue.
Thank you, David, ever so much for all your advice. If you would like to speak to David Cook or David Sawford about what we've covered in the podcast today, or even whilst you're ticking your way through your winter maintenance checklist, please do give them a call. Their details can be found on the Meet the Team page on our website. I have recorded a range of podcasts in previous months. Have a look at our podcast page on our website and see if there's any other subjects that might interest you. Our podcast can also be found on the various platforms such as YouTube, Spotify, Apple. Have a listen, and hopefully you'll tune in again next time. Many thanks. Goodbye. Our podcasts are for informational purposes only and are based on the information available at the date of the recording. Listeners are responsible for how they interpret and use the information, and Robinson Hall LLP will not be responsible for any losses, damages or liabilities that may arise from a listener relying on the information given. Listeners should take advice from an appropriate professional which is tailored to their specific needs.